Last June 17, while I was in Florida trying to get a few days' rest after my visit to Moscow, I first learned from news reports of the Watergate break-in. I was appalled at this senseless, illegal action, and I was shocked to learn that employees of the re-election committee were apparently among those guilty. I immediately ordered an investigation by appropriate government authorities. On September 15, as you will recall, indictments were brought against 7 defendants in the case. As the investigations went forward, I repeatedly asked those conducting the investigation whether there was any reason to believe that members of my administration were in any way involved. I received repeated assurances that there were not. Because of these continuing reassurances, because I believed the reports I was getting, because I had faith in the persons from whom I was getting them, I discounted the stories in the press that appeared to implicate members of my administration or other officials of the campaign committee. Until March of this year, I remained convinced that the denials were true and that the charges of involvement by members of the White House staff were false. The comments I made during this period, the comments made by my press secretary in my behalf, were based on the information provided to us at the time we made those comments. However, new information then came to me, which persuaded me that there was a real possibility that some of these charges were true, and suggesting further that there had been an effort to conceal the facts, both from the public, from you, and from me. As a result, on March 21st, I personally assumed the responsibility for coordinating intensive new inquiries into the matter. And I personally ordered those conducting the investigations to get all the facts and to report them directly to me right here in this office. I again ordered that all persons in the government or at the re-election committee should cooperate fully with the FBI, the prosecutors, and the grand jury. I also ordered that anyone who refused to cooperate in telling the truth would be asked to resign from government service. And with ground rules adopted that would preserve the basic constitutional separation of powers between the Congress and the presidency, I directed that members of the White House staff should appear and testify voluntarily under oath before the Senate committee, which was investigating Watergate. I was determined that we should get to the bottom of the matter and that the truth should be fully brought out no matter who was involved. At the same time, I was determined not to take precipitate action and to avoid, if at all possible, any action that would appear to reflect on innocent people. I wanted to be fair, but I knew that in the final analysis, the integrity of this office, public faith in the integrity of this office, would have to take priority over all personal considerations. Today, in one of the most difficult decisions of my presidency, I accepted the resignations of 2 of my closest associates in the White House, Bob Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, 2 of the finest public servants it has been my privilege to know. I want to stress that in accepting these resignations, I mean to leave no implication whatever of personal wrongdoing on their part. And I leave no implication tonight of implication on the part of others who have been charged in this matter. But in matters as sensitive as guarding the integrity of our democratic process, it is essential not only that rigorous legal and ethical standards be observed, but also that the public, you, have total confidence that they are both being observed and enforced by those in authority, and particularly by the President of the United States. They agreed with me that this move was necessary in order to restore that confidence. Because Attorney General Kleindienst, though a distinguished public servant, my personal friend for 20 years, with no personal involvement whatever in this matter, has been a close personal and professional associate of some of those who are involved in this case, he and I both felt that it was also necessary to name a new Attorney General. The counsel to the President, John Dean, has also resigned. As the new Attorney General, I have today named Elliot Richardson, a man of unimpeachable integrity and rigorously high principle. I have directed him to do everything necessary to ensure that the Department of Justice has the confidence and the trust of every law-abiding person in this country. I have given him absolute authority to make all decisions bearing upon the prosecution of the Watergate case and related matters. I have instructed him that if he should consider it appropriate, he has the authority to name a special supervising prosecutor for matters arising out of the case. Whatever may appear to have been the case before, whatever improper activities may yet be discovered in connection with this whole sordid affair, I want the American people, I want you to know beyond the shadow of a doubt that during my term as president, justice will be pursued fairly, fully, and impartially, no matter who is involved. This office is a sacred trust, and I am determined to be worthy of that trust. Looking back at the history of this case, two questions arise. How could it have happened? Who is to blame? Political commentators have correctly observed that during my 27 years in politics, I've always previously insisted on running my own campaigns for office. But 1972 presented a very different situation in both domestic and foreign policy. 1972 was a year of crucially important decisions, of intense negotiations, of vital new directions, particularly in working toward the goal which has been my overriding concern throughout my political career, the goal of bringing peace to America, peace to the world. And that is why I decided, as the 1972 campaign approached, that the presidency should come first and politics second. To the maximum extent possible, therefore, I sought to delegate campaign operations, to remove the day-to-day campaign decisions from the President's office and from the White House. I also, as you recall, severely limited the number of my own campaign appearances. Who then is to blame for what happened in this case? For specific criminal actions by specific individuals, those who committed those actions must, of course, bear the liability and pay the penalty. For the fact that alleged improper actions took place within the White House or within my campaign organization, the easiest course would be for me to blame those to whom I delegated the responsibility to run the campaign. But that would be a cowardly thing to do. I will not place the blame on subordinates, on people whose zeal exceeded their judgment, and who may have done wrong in a cause they deeply believe to be right. In any organization, the man at the top must bear the responsibility. That responsibility, therefore, belongs here, in this office. I accept it. And I pledge to you tonight from this office that I will do everything in my power to ensure that the guilty are brought to justice and that such abuses are purged from our political processes in the years to come, long after I have left this office. Some people, quite properly appalled at the abuses that occurred, will say that Watergate demonstrates the bankruptcy of the American political system. I believe precisely the opposite is true. Watergate represented a series of illegal acts and bad judgments by a number of individuals. It was the system that has brought the facts to light and that will bring those guilty to justice. A system that in this case has included a determined grand jury, honest prosecutors, a courageous judge, John Sirica, and a vigorous free press. It is essential now that we place our faith in that system, and especially in the judicial system. It is essential that we let the judicial process go forward, respecting those safeguards that are established to protect the innocent as well as to convict the guilty. It is essential that in reacting to the excesses of others, we not fall into excesses ourselves. It is also essential that we not be so distracted by events such as this that we neglect the vital work before us, before this nation, before America, at a time of critical importance to America and the world. Since March, when I first learned that the Watergate affair might in fact be far more serious than I had been led to believe, it has claimed far too much of my time and my attention. Whatever may now transpire in the case, whatever the actions of the grand jury, whatever the outcome of any eventual trials, I must now turn my full attention, and I shall do so once again, to the larger duties of this office. I owe it to this great office that I hold, and I owe it to you, to my country. I know that as Attorney General, Elliot Richardson will be both fair and he will be fearless in pursuing this case wherever it leads. I am confident that with him in charge, justice will be done. There is vital work to be done toward our goal of a lasting structure of peace in the world, work that cannot wait, work that I must do. Tomorrow, for example, Chancellor Brandt of West Germany will visit the White House for talks that are a vital element of the Year of Europe, as 1973 has been called. We are already preparing for the next Soviet-American summit meeting later this year. This is also a year in which we are seeking to negotiate a mutual and balanced reduction of armed forces in Europe, which will reduce our defense budget and allow us to have funds for other purposes at home so desperately needed. It is the year when the United States and Soviet negotiators will seek to work out the second and even more important round of our talks on limiting nuclear arms and of reducing the danger of a nuclear war that would destroy civilization as we know it. It is a year in which we confront the difficult tasks of maintaining peace in Southeast Asia and in the potentially explosive Middle East. There's also vital work to be done right here in America to ensure prosperity. And that means a good job for everyone who wants to work. to control inflation that I know worries every housewife, everyone who tries to balance a family budget in America. To set in motion new and better ways of ensuring progress toward a better life for all Americans. When I think of this office, of what it means, I think of all the things that I want to accomplish for this nation, of all the things I want to accomplish for you. On Christmas Eve, during my terrible personal ordeal of the renewed bombing of North Vietnam, which after 12 years of war finally helped to bring America peace with honor, I sat down just before midnight. I wrote out some of my goals for my second term as president. Let me read them to you. To make it possible for our children and for our children's children to live in a world of peace. To make this country be more than ever a land of opportunity, of equal opportunity, full opportunity for every American. To provide jobs for all who can work and generous help for those who cannot work. To establish a climate of decency and civility in which each person respects the feelings and the dignity and the God-given rights of his neighbor. To make this a land in which each person can dare to dream, can live his dreams, not in fear but in hope, proud of his community, proud of his country, proud of what America has meant to himself and to the world. These are great goals. I believe we must work for them. We can achieve them. But we cannot achieve these goals unless we dedicate ourselves to another goal. We must maintain the integrity of the White House. And that integrity must be real, not transparent. There can be no whitewash at the White House. We must reform our political process, ridding it not only of the violations of the law, but also of the ugly mob violence and other inexcusable campaign tactics that have been too often practiced and too readily accepted in the past, including those that may have been a response by one side to the excesses or expected excesses of the other side. Two wrongs do not make a right. I've been in public life for more than a quarter of a century. Like any other calling, politics has good people and bad people. And let me tell you, the great majority in politics, in the Congress, in the federal government, in the state government, are good people. I know that it can be very easy, under the intensive pressures of a campaign, for even well-intentioned people to fall into shady tactics, to rationalize this on the grounds that what is at stake is of such importance to the nation that the end justifies the means. And both of our great parties have been guilty of such tactics in the past. In recent years, however, the campaign excesses that have occurred on all sides have provided a sobering demonstration of how far this false doctrine can take us. The lesson is clear. America, in its political campaigns, must not again fall into the trap of letting the end, however great that end is, justify the means. I urge the leaders of both political parties, I urge citizens, all of you everywhere, to join in working toward a new set of standards new rules and procedures to ensure that future elections will be as nearly free of such abuses as they possibly can be made. This is my goal. I ask you to join in making it America's goal. When I was inaugurated for a second term this past January 20th, I gave each member of my cabinet and each member of my senior White House staff a special 4-year calendar with each day marked to show the number of days remaining to the administration. In the inscription on each calendar, I wrote these words: the presidential term which begins today consists of 1,461 days, no more, no less. Each can be a day of strengthening and renewal for America. Each can add depth and dimension to the American experience. If we strive together, if we make the most of the challenge and the opportunity that these days offer us, they can stand out as great days for America and great moments in the history of the world. I looked at my own calendar this morning up at Camp David as I was working on this speech. It showed exactly 1,361 days remaining in my term. I want these to be the best days in America's history. Because I love America. I deeply believe that America is the hope of the world. And I know that in the quality and wisdom of the leadership America gives lies the only hope for millions of people all over the world, that they can live their lives in peace and freedom. We must be worthy of that hope in every sense of the word. Tonight, I ask for your prayers to help me in everything that I do throughout the days of my presidency to be worthy of their hopes and of yours. God bless America, and God bless each and every one of you.
Is it a fact now, Mr. McCord, that you presently stand convicted on a multi-count federal indictment charging burglary, electronic surveillance, and conspiracy arising out of the break-in of the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate?
That's correct.
And are you now awaiting sentence on that conviction?
That is correct.
What is your professional background, Mr. McCord?
I was born in 1924 in Waurika, W-A-U-R-I-K-A, Waurika, Oklahoma. I worked first for the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 1942, 1943, in Washington, D.C. and New York City in radio intelligence duties. I subsequently, in 43 to 45, was an Army Air Corps officer. From 1948 to 1951, I worked as a special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation in San Diego and San Francisco, California. I worked from 1951 to 1970 with the Central Intelligence Agency as a security officer. I retired from that agency in August 1970 after 25 years federal service. Do you want the educational background or not?
No, that's sufficient, Mr. McCord. During your service with the CIA or the FBI, did you receive any awards or commendations for your service?
I received on retirement in August 1970 the Distinguished Service Award for Outstanding Performance of Duty with CIA. I received some other...
Now, prior to your arrest, indictment, and conviction, relating to the Watergate incident. Were you ever arrested, charged with a crime, or the subject of any complaint or disciplinary proceeding in your life?
I've had traffic violations in the Washington area. Yes, sir. Tickets.
Is that all?
Yes, sir.
Now, were you an employee of the committee to re-elect the president?
I was.
What position did you hold? What were your duties?
I came aboard first as a security consultant part-time in September 1971.
And by the way, how did you get that job?
I was introduced initially by Mr. John Caulfield to Mr. Robert Odell, the Director of Administration, who testified yesterday. And based on that interview, was employed part-time and then full-time in January, the 1st of January 1972.
Now, what were your duties in that position as security chief?
The duties were essentially the function of the protection of the property and the lives of the personnel committee in their facility there, and subsequently in the facility at Miami, Florida, that the committee and some of the White House staff were to occupy during the Republican National Convention in August of 1972. The duties were primarily those of physical security protection, of personnel security, some document security, and some protective work for the family of John Mitchell.
Now, for those duties and that assignment that you just described, under whose direction did you work?
Primarily under the direction of Mr. Robert Odell, who was my immediate supervisor in the committee. The responsibilities with Mr. Mitchell and his family, I received directions from him, from Mrs. Mitchell, from Robert Odell, and from Fred LaRue at various times.
Now, did there come a time when you worked under the direction of Gordon Liddy?
Yes, sir, did.
What was Mr. Liddy's position at that time?
He was at first, from December until about March 1970, December 71 to about March 1972, General Counsel for the committee to re-elect the president. Thereafter, he was occupied the same position with the Finance Committee for the re-election of the president.
When did this arrangement, or in which you worked under his direction, begin, Mr. McCord, with Mr. Liddy?
The first discussions of the arrangement began sometime in January 1972, early January.
Could you briefly state to the committee, Mr. McCord, what it was that Mr. Liddy wanted you to do?
I can give a bit of a background if you want that. When he first came aboard the committee in December 1971, he began to, we struck up an acquaintance. We'd had a common background. And he began to question me regarding the state of the art of certain technical devices, for one thing, listening devices and so on. This appeared to be, at that point in time, a professional interest, a normal professional interest of someone who's worked in the field or law enforcement. We discussed as well the common topic of common interest to he and to me and to others who were senior in the staff of the anticipated demonstrations and possible violence that might be coming up in San Diego, California, which was originally scheduled to be the convention site for the Republican Convention in 1972 in August. The discussions on other...
Raise your voice a little if you can, Mr. McCord.
The discussions on other matters...
I can interrupt just for a minute, Mr. McCord. I believe it might help. The panel operator might give us some advice in this respect if you could be a little further away from the microphone and talk a little louder, because we're having a difficult time up here trying to hear you.
I think I'm a bit hoarse. If you could turn up the volume, that might help.
Would you continue?
Yes. Gradually, the discussion in December, January, February 1972 with Mr. Liddy gradually developed into more and more conversation on his part with me in the offices of the Committee for the Re-election of the President regarding technical devices and political matters pertaining to the forthcoming convention, and it became apparent that he had an interest in several areas of intelligence gathering pertaining to the Democratic Party and the Democratic Convention, and in which it was contemplated or planned by him and by others whom he referred to in these conversations as John Mitchell, John Dean, counsel to the President, Jeb Magruder, then in January the interim director of the Committee to Re-elect the President, in which it appeared that those men, the four of them, were by late January, a planning stage in which political intelligence was to be discussed at meetings in the Attorney General's office, Mr. Mitchell's office, and in which Mr. Liddy was seeking from me certain information regarding the costs and the types of electronic devices that could be used in bugging. That a part of the budget proposal which he was working on. A second part dealt with photography operations, clandestine photography operations, and that a third part dealt with the broad area of political espionage, political intelligence.
Well, now specifically, Mr. McCord, when you speak of political activities, political intelligence, bugging activities, what do you mean in terms of how that was to be obtained? Try to be as specific as you can from your knowledge of what Mr. Liddy told you.
The area of political espionage and intelligence, he did not, I can set that one aside pretty quickly, he did not elaborate on in much detail at all, to me personally. Apparently others were involved with him, which I can refer to later in the conversation, specifically Mr. Hunt, E. Howard Hunt. The topic of photography, clandestine photography, in which he was preparing a budget and preparing to meet with the gentleman I've referred to before in planning sessions, dealt with photographic equipment and the cost of photographic equipment and specific items of equipment that would be used against the Democratic Party, the Democratic hierarchy in Washington primarily, but also in Miami, Florida. The electronic devices, which he referred to specifically, were of a variety of types.
Well, I'm asking specifically what the types were, but how were they to be used? Where were they to be placed, from your understanding?
The initial interest specified by Mr. Liddy in this regard were, number one, against Mr. Larry O'Brien, then chairman of the Democratic National Committee in Washington, D.C., at his residence and subsequently at his office in the Watergate office building. Perhaps other offices of the Democratic National Committee. The McGovern headquarters in Washington, D.C. were mentioned quite early in 1972. And there was some general reference to the Democratic National Convention facility or site, wherever it might be located, at their convention in the summer of 1972.
All right, now, Mr. McCord, in connection with this assignment, in which you were having these discussions with Mr. Liddy, did you come to associate yourself with Mr. E. Howard Hunt, Bernard Barker, Eugene Martinez, Frank Sturgis, and Virgil Gonzalez?
Yes, I did.
And as a result of that association and your agreement with Mr. Liddy, did you, with Mr. Barker, Sturgis, Martinez, and Gonzalez, illegally enter the Democratic National Committee headquarters on 2 occasions, one on or about May 30, 1972, and the other in the early morning hours of June 17, 1972?
I did.
On the first occasion, on or about May 30, 1972, did you install 2 telephone interception devices, or wiretaps, on 2 office telephones, one on the telephone of Spencer Oliver and the other on the telephone of Lawrence O'Brien?
I did.
Leaving aside for the time being why you broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters to Watergate the second time on June 17, and what circumstances led to your arrest, you were in fact arrested by plainclothesmen of the District of Columbia Metropolitan Police shortly after you entered. Is that true?
That's correct.
And is that arrest which led to your present conviction?
That's correct.
Could you tell the committee, Mr. McCord, why, after a lifetime of work as a law enforcement officer, without, as you testified, any blemish on your career, did you agree with Mr. Liddy to engage in his program of burglaries and illegal wiretapping, and specifically the 2 break-ins on May 30 and June 17th of the Democratic National Committee headquarters at Watergate?
There were a number of reasons associated with the ultimate decision of mine to do so. One of the reasons, and a very important reason to me, was the fact that the Attorney General himself, Mr. John Mitchell, at his offices had considered and approved the operation according to Mr. Liddy. Secondly, that the counsel for the President, Mr. John Dean, had participated in those decisions with him, that one was a top legal officer for the United States in the Department of Justice, and the second gentleman was a top legal officer in the White House.
Then you say that from after the return of the bill of indictment in September down to the last day of the trial, that you are urged to plead guilty, remain silent by a number of people. Did Mr. Hunt ever urge you to plead guilty and remain silent? That is E. Howard Hunt.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Howard Hunt.
I'm trying to recall, sir, the exact words.
Yes.
The words most frequently used by Mr. Hunt with me was that executive clemency would be available to me.
Yes. How many times did he urge you to plead guilty? That
No,
is
sir,
all.
I mean to correct that statement. I don't recall Mr. Hunt using those words with me,
But did
to plead guilty.
Did he urge you to remain silent? Did
Not in exact words, no, sir.
what words did he use, as near as you remember?
He used words to the effect that he used words stating that executive clemency is going to be made available to us. And he spoke in terms as though it already had been committed. I say already as of the time that he first mentioned it to me.
You testified this morning about a meeting in Mr. Mitchell's office. Was there more than one meeting with the Attorney General, or only one?
I understood there was more than one.
Talking about in which you personally were involved.
I did not attend, but I was told that by Mr. Liddy that there was more than one meeting that took place. I had heard him mention two specifically.
Did you yourself ever attend a meeting in Mr. Mitchell's office about any matter?
I attended meetings, yes, in his office at the Committee to Re-elect the President. When he subsequently came over, I visited at his offices, at the Attorney General's office, at the Department of Justice in December on another matter, but not to discuss these particular operations.
How many different visits or conversations have you ever had with Mr. Mitchell?
Numerous, sir.
Dozen, 15, 20, more?
I would guess 15.
Does he know you by your name
Yes, sir.
individually, and you know him?
Yes, sir.
You called him Mr. Attorney General, I presume?
Yes, sir.
What did he call you?
Before June 17th,
Before and after, please.
I haven't seen him since June 17th. He called me Jim, I believe.
He called you Jim, so you're on a first-name basis with him.
Did you ever make any effort to bug Senator Muskie's or Senator McGovern's headquarters?
Never Senator Muskie's, Senator McGovern's. There was a visit to the office by me, I believe, on 3 occasions in total, one of which I had some electronic equipment with me but was never installed because there were other people working there at the time.
In other words, you could never found any time that the office was empty.
That's correct.
Mr. McCord, in response to a question from Senator Baker, you said that you thought that what you were doing in this operation was legal. Now, of course, you spent some years in the FBI, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
And also in the CIA.
That's correct, sir.
You ran your own security company?
Yes, sir.
You were charged at the trial with 7 counts, as I understand: conspiracy, intent to steal property, entering the Democrat National Headquarters, attempted interception of telephone conversations, and attempted interception of oral conversations, as well as possession of a telephone listening device and a oral communications device. Now, is it your testimony that you thought that all of these acts there on June the 17th were legal?
It's my testimony, sir, if I may repeat a portion of it, that the Attorney General had the authority to authorize it. It was my experience that he did, in fact, authorize wiretapping and other related activity that were within his purview, that he could and would have turned it down out of hand at the very beginning of the operation itself, if in fact it were clearly and beyond any question illegal. I was advised that it was.
But authorizations by an attorney general for wiretapping are made, of course, in connection with, say, national security cases or crime, trying to find out about organized crime, always in the purview of the attorney general's office. Wasn't this authorization a operation which had to do with the committee to re-elect the president? Hasn't that been your testimony this morning?
My testimony was that it appeared to me that this operation was really threefold, that it was set in motion while the Attorney General was Attorney General. Secondly, that the White House was a party to the authorization itself and to the justification for the operation because the counsel to the President had sat in on it. Thirdly, that the Committee for the Re-election for the President was represented in those discussions and that they may have been the funding mechanism for it. And fourthly, because of a time delay here and my knowledge of the relationship of Mr. Mitchell with his immediate superior. My conclusion was that his immediate superior approved and set in motion that operation. Therefore, it had all of those implications to me, that it was just not simply the Committee for the Re-election of the President's operation, because it began with the Attorney General while he was the Attorney General.
The activities, though, that you were doing, as I understand this course of events, were supervised by Liddy and Hunt, is that correct?
They were agents, as I understand it, for the Attorney General and for the White House.
Well, that isn't the question I asked. I said that they were the ones that were supervising and guiding your activities, were they not?
They were the immediate supervisor, but not by
And
my
weren't
understanding.
they working for the committee to re-elect the president?
Mr. Hunt never did, to my knowledge. I believe there's been testimony to that effect by Mr. Odom.
Who was Mr. Liddy working for during this period of time we're talking about?
Had two responsibilities. One is General Counsel originally for the Committee for the Re-election of the President, and the second one is General Counsel for the Finance Committee for the Re-election of the President.
The activities you have described, that is, bugging the Democrat National Committee and photographing, as I understand, documents there, as well as the McGovern and Muskie operations, those all had to do with political campaigning, didn't they?
I think what we haven't discussed here are some of the other things that went into my motivations and to the explanation by Mr. Liddy to me of the reasons for undertaking this operation at the Democratic National Committee, which included electronic photography and those two operations specifically, but the overall operation was not limited to that, either in the original planning or in the authorization by the Attorney General.
Well, did anything you do in this area of bugging and electronic surveillance have anything to do with anybody or any activity other than political campaigning of somebody?
Well, it came into being because of one of the basic motivations of mine, which we have not been concerned with, were the violence-oriented demonstrators that we previously discussed in testimony before this committee.
I don't want to interrupt at a guide, but it would be helpful, Mr. McCord, if you were responsive to the questions. Did you do any electronic bugging or surveillance that had anything to do with anybody or anything that did not involve political activity?
No, sir.
You didn't spy on the Russians or the Chinese or anybody like that? Well, don't you think at some time it might have occurred to you that perhaps these were illegal things and didn't really have anything to do with national security?
Oh, yes, it occurred to me at the time the matters were being planned and being discussed. It's occurred to me since, yes.
And then why did you go ahead with it?
For the reasons basically the reasons I've stated, but those were not the only reasons. The fact that the Attorney General, the White House itself, and in my personal opinion, the President of the United States, I felt, had set into motion this operation.
In other words, even though...
Because of the close relationship of Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Dean, the fact that Mr. Dean worked for the President.
Even though you, if I'm expressing your thoughts correctly, believed it to be illegal or were highly suspicious that it was, nonetheless, because the Attorney General, in your opinion, was ordering this, then you ought to go ahead and do it. Is that a fair thing to say?
Sure, it is a gray area, no question about it. But because the Attorney General, in his position, and because the White House was involved in it, these matters were the matters on which my decision turned. I realized the illegality under normal circumstances, but I also realized that the Attorney General can make matters legal by his signature on a piece of paper or his oral authorization of it, which he does do in domestic subversion cases and in national security cases where electronic surveillance is involved. It's been done hundreds of times.
Mr. Barker,
Yes, sir.
you're 55 years old.
56.
You have a real estate business in Miami. You were previously involved in the Bay of Pigs operation for the CIA. You're a veteran of the United States Army in World War II, where you were a captain in the Army Air Corps. You were a German prisoner of war for 17 months.
16 months.
Mr. Barker, what on earth would motivate you at your station in life, at your age and with that background, to do something that surely you knew to be illegal?
Senator E. Howard Hunt, under the name of Eduardo, represents to the Cuban people their liberation. I cannot deny my services in the way that it was proposed to me on a matter of national security.
Now, I believe you you were involved in the Ellsberg break-in in California.
That is correct, sir.
Have you pled guilty to that, and have you been sentenced?
No, that trial's in the future.
Trial has not been held.
That I know, no, sir, no.
Now, how many times did you attempt to break in the Democratic National Committee before you succeeded?
To the best of my recollection, there was 4 tries, 2 of which were successful.
2 were successful, the last one when you were arrested. First one, I believe, was over the Memorial Day weekend last year. And 2 previous attempts that were unsuccessful.
That is correct.
How did they happen to prove unsuccessful?
One was, we had a banquet, and to the best of my knowledge, someone was staying late at the Democratic headquarters and the mission was aborted.
In other words, it was occupied and aborted the first time. What about the second time?
Second time, an entry was tried just walking into the building on the excuse we were going to another floor. It didn't work. We left.
Were there any other instances except 4 times you attempted to break in Democratic National Committee headquarters, 2 of which were successful, and the Ellsberg psychiatrist that you were involved in a break-in?
We had plans to enter McGovern's headquarters, but they were never actually attempted.
That was aborted also.
Yes.
Now, isn't it true that some lawyers showed up immediately after you went to the jail following the break-in the Democratic National headquarters?
That is correct.
And you did not send for them? Any other members of your break-in group?
That is correct.
Do you have any idea how those lawyers were alerted and came down to attempt to aid you?
I have no idea.
Were you surprised that they showed up?
No.
You anticipated that they would?
Yes.
How did you anticipate that if you had no previous knowledge they would?
On the philosophy that if you are caught by the enemy, every effort will be made to rescue you.
Who did you think would attempt to rescue you?
Whoever my backers were.
Did you know who your backers were?
No. I had no knowledge of anyone by first name other than Mr. Hunt, who I had known in a previous operation, but I dealt with in this operation as Eduardo. And Mr. Gordon Liddy, who I only knew as George Leonard.
Who did you think your backers were?
Sure, I wasn't there to think.
You wouldn't...
I was there to follow orders, not to think.
You wouldn't wonder who was giving you the orders?
I beg your pardon?
Didn't you wonder who was giving you the orders?
No, I had absolute confidence then, as I do now, in the people I was dealing with, sir.
But you knew you weren't working for Castro, didn't you?
That I do know.
But who did you think you were working for?
I was working for Mr. Hunt and those things that Mr. Hunt represents.
What did he represent?
Eduardo represents the liberation of Cuba, the anti-communist symbol. It represents the government of the United States in one form, in its covert form.
How did you think you could liberate Cuba by participating in a burglary in Washington, D.C.?
If we helped Mr. Hunt and this government in matters which I will further add I believed in, it would establish a situation in which, besides the right that the Cuban people have to be free and independent, it would establish us as having aided this government in this mission. I view that in the same way where hundreds of Cubans have been helping in Africa, in Vietnam, and in other areas of the world where the people in my particular association are extremely grateful to those sectors of this country who favor our liberation. Mr. Hunt represented this in the greatest degree.
Did you have something further you want to say?
Yes, sir. I think it is only fair, before I leave here, to say that in a certain way, the things that I have said do not represent me as a person. I am part of a team of men of whom I am very proud to have been associated with. Mainly, I am speaking of my 3 associates from Miami. I think I have given a general description of Mr. Martinez. It is only fair now to state that Mr. Frank Sturgis, who by birth was Frank Fiorini, is a devoted anti-communist fighter who has fought against dictatorship, not only of the left but of the right, that he was the first person to turn against Castro after helping him with his revolution, that he has made innumerable raids over Cuba, that he had been captured in a Honduras government, by the Honduras government trying to infiltrate Cuba, that Mr. Gonzalez was the member of the OA, Organización Auténtica, which, with an extensive background in the underground in Cuba, that all of these men are devoted family men who feel very deeply in a cause, and that I am not here as a person, but as a part of a team. And that it would be unfair, in my concept, that these men were considered in anything but in the true light which of the things that they believe in, that we all, outside of reprimands in some cases of Mr. Fiorini for having acted in these matters, our greatest previous crime before the Watergate were just simple traffic violations, that we are not criminal elements, that the word, as a newspaper recently said, we are the world's best known burglars. The word burglar we'll have to live with. That we resent very emotionally the word that we were hired. There was no need to buy our silence. We are not for sale. And that this must be said because this represents our feelings. By this I don't mean that we are perfect, that we're not full of all sorts of defectious persons, that we consider ourselves superior beings to anyone. We're just plain people that very deeply believe that Cuba has a right to be independent.